moderator, Dr. Scott Vowels, is a supplier diversity lead for Apple and the author of Don't Be Afraid to Call the Baby Ugly, a best-selling Amazon book in business. Our panelists, next to Scott, we have Greg Cheesewright, president of Computech Corporation, Mr. Brian Tippens, Chief Diversity Officer for HP, Mr. Clifford Bailey, President of TechSoft Systems and the National MBE Input Committee Chair for the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And last but certainly not least, and a former panelist on one of our other bigger discussions, Dr. Fred McKinney. He's the former council president of the Greater New England MSDC and is currently the managing director for MBE programs at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel for Bigger Discussion 4. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Vowels.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Welcome to the 4th edition of the Bigger Discussion. And, you know, this is one of those, we talk about elephant in the room topics, and I'm sorry, I haven't even started. I'm going to go off topic already. There's something that's on my mind that's kind of concerning me. I get all these questions about the diversity of the panel. And is the panel diverse enough? We've had women, we've had representatives of the LGBT community, we've had every ethnicity on here, and I know what you're looking at the panel now, and I'm just going to talk about the elephant in the room because up until now, I have been the only bald brother on the panel. And I am standing against discrimination against those of us that are follically challenged. So I would like to welcome Clifford A. Bailey.
Thank you.
We are all about diversity on the panel. So, this is our 4th bigger discussion. In 2012, the theme was the future of supplier diversity. In 2013, it was supplier diversity 2.0. In 2014, it was impact, and we were talking about economic impact and other types of impact. And this year, it's going to be, our theme is the digital divide. So with that being said, you've heard who our panelists are. We've got a lot of thought leaders in this industry. So we're just going to kick it off. My first question is, when we talk about the digital divide, is there a digital divide? And if so, how would you define it? And in an effort to be fair, I'm going to start off with the other follically challenged man, Clifford A. Bailey. Clifford, if you wouldn't mind, just give us your thoughts on, is there a digital divide? And if so, how would you define it?
Well, let me just share with the audience that it was ironic on yesterday that many of us were on the same plane and had challenges of our plane leaving on time, and we started this discussion. And so some of what you're going to hear is part of that discussion coming out of it. And so overall, we concluded that the digital divide really was more in the community than it was in the businesses. And when it comes down to children in school and having to go to libraries and things of that nature. But when it comes to businesses, it really comes down to resources. What resources are there available to that small business and its capabilities to deliver on what its customers are requesting? So the digital divide does exist, but it is more in our communities than it is in our businesses. But it does rely in our businesses based upon the resources available to those particular businesses.
Now, Greg, I know you are passionate about it from a different perspective, and so I'd like to hear what you think about this.
I agree with Clifford. I go back to the divide goes right back into grade school. I believe if we're going to have education in the urban city and have those children allowed to go to college, how do I get it to be fair when everybody in what I call the suburban community, however we want to put that, or more influential. Everyone's got iPads, everyone's got access to a computer, everybody's at home, everyone's got iPhones, and we've got children in the urban community waiting 45 minutes to get on one computer. And when they get off that computer, they've got to go to the church to get their dinner. There's going to be no mom or dad to come get them. They got to go home, and that child also is working on the weekends to make that family work at 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. And then at the same rung, that child can't get in a certain school because the grade point now, and if you look into these grade points, is not a 4-point. Or how many kids aren't getting into college, they have 3 9s and they're still not getting in because there's so many other children. This is where the divide is. So we will not have entrepreneurs in the future if we don't start right back in grade school and start saying at one point, I will tell you right now, and even in my own business, we take on people who can't even spell IT. And we're training them now out of college because they, you know, the colleges took them in and they studied literature, and they get out and they got no jobs. Okay? So we've got to go back and start making the divide in the digital world. I've seen my own grandson at 2 years old work an iPad better than I could, and I was stunned. He could get over this and do this and touch. We've got to make that divide. So whether we have to go back to the churches and provide computers for them to work on, and even back to where I believe, and which we have done in the past, go to the U of M's, where I am up in Detroit. Go to Dartmouth. Take the old computers, wash them, take them to the church, put programs in for the kids, so math and sciences that are fun. They're fun after school. Have 20 banks of computers there, regardless if they're old, new, old, whatever. Get them to work. Get somehow to get access to the digital age. And only then will we start to see that we will get some sort of access for entrepreneurs. Otherwise, if you start looking at MBEs throughout the world, I don't think MBEs are growing in huge numbers. Actually, to be really honest with you, they're declining. Okay, it's not happening. So we have got to make sure the young people, and I'm talking young, and I'm going into kindergarten, preschool, we've got to start them in this digital. They're doing it at home in some of the suburban communities. Now we've got to get it into other places, whether it be YMCAs, whatever. We have got to start that infiltration very, very young.
So I'd like to turn it over to Brian, and for those of you that were wondering, IT spells it. As he had mentioned that. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Thank you for that. I want to start out with just a shout out to you, Scott, for allowing me to join you here in Afela. I've been a fan of the Bigger Discussion for many years and followed it and dreamed of one day being worthy of being on this stage with these eloquent folks. And I want to give a shout out to Scott's book, Don't Be Afraid to Call the Baby Out. It's a wonderful read. Who's read the book in the crowd? If you haven't, read the book. If you're not a big reader, at least read the first 3 pages because I wrote the foreword to the book. So I get a little bit more fundamental. I agree with both of the gentlemen and the statements they've made. I'd say that from a definition standpoint, the digital divide, as we start to define it in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, was around the gap between those who had access to technology and those who didn't at a very fundamental level. And at that time, that gap was largely around racial lines. You know, even at that point in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a large portion of the United States, about 19–20%, many people would say, that had no access to broadband, no access to the internet, period, because they're rural areas, underserved areas. And even in the areas where we did have access to technology, there was a split along racial lines. It was about 50%, some would say, and depending on what academician you ask, you'd get different numbers, but maybe 50% of the population that still at that time had no access to the internet, which equaled access to technology. And of that subset, of course, it split along racial lines. About 55%, most would say, of white Americans had access, while maybe 35% of Hispanics, 35% of African Americans. And the numbers have changed and evolved over the years. At that time, it was largely about access to broadband. It was about wiring America, and there was large initiatives out there with all the big telcos going out and wiring underserved communities. And then there was this technology shift, of course, Apple gets low credit for that, of driving us towards mobile mobile devices, right? Accessing technology through mobile devices. We sort of leapfrog the need to be wired in a wired way. And so there's lots of people who would argue now, black people, brown people, white people, all have equal access to a cell phone, mobile access to technology, so we have no more digital divide. But I would argue, as the gentleman did, that it still exists, and it's largely about not just access to technology, although that's still an issue. It's about content. It's about what do you do and what are we able to do when we've got that access to technology. There's still a lot of folks who would argue that we're, in minority communities, big consumers of data. We can use Facebook and pull things down and watch podcasts and what's that website where you go to watch people fight? All-Star Hip Hop, you know. We consume data in a big way, but we're not necessarily producers of the data. And so right now, I speak from a technology lens. I'm based in the Silicon Valley, as Phelan mentioned. I lead diversity and inclusion for Hewlett-Packard. And at no time in the past has there been more attention being paid to the lack of diversity in the technology sector than right now. You know, the narrative is Silicon Valley, mostly white, mostly male. Very low representation of African Americans, Hispanic, and largely women in the Valley. And as we're analyzing that issue and trying to look at solutions, it's definitely a pipeline issue, most of us agree, to Greg's point. And there's those who argue that we need to start to grab the hearts and minds of minority and women in technology around high school. And some say that's way too late. It has to be in grade school and maybe even earlier. And so all that to say, the divide still definitely exists, but it's not necessarily about access to Wi-Fi, access to technology, access to internet. I think it's largely about the content. When you have it, what do you do with it?
Dr. Fred.
Well, thank you again for having me on the panel, and this is really an honor for me to be back. I'm wearing a different hat now. When I was here the first time, I was, as Phelan said, I was with the council, and now I'm with the Tuck School of Business. And to the earlier panelist's point, I do think that the digital divide, if you go back to when we first started using that terminology, was in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I was doing a little research to prepare for this, and I found out how many smartphones are out there in the United States right now. And it's 182 million smartphones. And it's projected to be about 200 million by the end of next year. And so these are smartphones defined by the ability to access the internet, okay, and to do some other things. Emails, text messages, regular phone calls. That really means almost everybody in America that's over the age of 6 has a cell phone, has a smartphone. I would bet that all of you in this room have smartphones. So, you know, when the digital divide was first being discussed, it was about computers. It was about, you know, old desktop computers. And there was a digital divide, and there still is a digital divide. But I see that the technology, and this is what happens with technology and innovation. Innovation brings technology to the use of everyone. You know, and if you look at almost any technology, it could be cars. Not everybody had a car when cars first came out. There was a car divide. That's gone, right? Most people have cars. Many people have cars. But I think that there still is a divide that is relevant to technology. And that divide is an income and wealth, and as was mentioned, an education divide, and a content divide. Technology can be part of the solution to that divide. I was at a conference recently, and there was a gentleman at the conference from Bangladesh. And 10 years ago, he wanted to open a cell phone company in Bangladesh. And he went to all of the cell phone companies in the world, and they said, you know, Bangladeshis can't afford cell phones. Why would we be partners with you? And he started anyway. And what he was able to do was prove them wrong. That one, there was a demand for technology among very poor people, and two, that they figured out a way to get that technology into the hands of a large number of people. Initially, people shared phones, okay? They shared technology. We do that here in this country when low-income individuals go to the library to use a computer, or they share a cell phone at home. But this technology has spread in Bangladesh. It has spread in the United States. It will be part of the solution. I think that there are some important policy issues that we have to address around technology. I mean, I don't see why we don't have access to Wi-Fi in every city in America, paid for by taxpayers. And put that technology at the, and I apologize for those folks who are selling Wi-Fi services that might be in the room, but there may be something good for you there. But this is a technology that has to be out there because, as you said, these young kids are using this technology in very creative ways. And they're going to find solutions to problems that we don't even know exist right now.
Correct.
So thank you, Dr. Fred. And I would like to say, all of you, if you have the latest iPhone 6 Plus, at this particular time, please feel free to turn it off. Now, we're going to start with you this time, Brian. So, is this a diverse business problem or is it a societal problem?
Well, you know, I think on some level it's a little bit both because our businesses and our business community certainly reflects the attributes of the communities they come from. And I want to first echo some of the comments that Dr. Fred made about the access and wiring cities. I think it directly mirrors the way we approached energy in the U.S. when energy first became pervasive, electric transmission technologies in the late 1800s and really even into kind of LBJ in the 1940s when a large portion of the society didn't have access to energy. It was more of a privilege than a right. And so I think at some point we have to answer that question. Is access to the internet a right that should be shared by all? And once we adopt that utility model, then we'd have greater access to that technology. But as we do, I'd say because we still have a gap inside of our communities, and our communities are the population pools that feed the employees for our future MBEs and the growth of technology and innovation, that it's a little bit of both. But I think it's a little bit of a level of maturity. So those more mature MBEs, like all of us in the room, would probably say, no, I've got as much access to technology as the majority-owned companies, and that the internet is a great equalizer. I can use technology to make my customers think I'm as big as my competitors, as fast and as agile. But I certainly, from a corporate point of view, see a number of MBEs that are more young companies, it's not just MBEs, it's other small businesses as well, who aren't effectively leveraging the technology, and it's a conditioned precedent to doing business with a corp. If you want to get paid, you have to know how to use those systems in an innovative way. If you want to provide new proposals, you don't do that with a pen and a pad, you know, it has to be through leveraging technology. And so I'd say that divide, largely a societal problem, but we see that reflected in the business community today.
So being in the business community, and you were so passionate about it from the cradle, what's your thoughts on that, Greg?
Well, and again, companies like yours are on a different level. And of course, I will not mention any names. We have been into companies that are huge. And when it comes to technology, they're in the cradle. And I'm talking where you'll have 4 different platforms inside of a major corporation, and one could be SAP because they're in Europe, and then they're over here and they got something Edwards, but they can't talk to one another, and it's been that way for 5 or 6 years. And so I actually said to the one individual, well, how do you get your spend from this part of the company to this part of the company? Oh, we don't count those 2, we just do the automotive one. Because they can't talk to one another, and these are major corporations. So some of them, when we've had a little setback here in the early 2000s, people didn't invest money into technology. And now all of a sudden things have gotten better, and everyone's like, quick, gotta get up, I gotta get this going, I need this newest thing. In technology, we're changing every 3 to 4 months. There's something new coming out. There's something, part of the problem you'll see now, which is from the business analytics side, is companies are willing to put things on the market without really testing them to see what bites, what is, and then they'll come up with a fix in the, and that was never done before. So everybody here is a guinea pig. Everyone here is being tested all the time. We're trying to, it may not work, they don't care. They want to be first to market. Okay, so that's a problem to me when we don't have all the testing. Now you go back to the societal piece. Yes, and Brian is dead on. It is both. There's no question it's both. But I see it, I don't know. I really believe in what Brian says about the content. Until we understand the content, what I can use and how I can use it to my advantage, it's just like having a car sitting there and you win a car and you're all excited, but you don't have a key and there's no motor. It looks great, everything, until you understand what you have and what you can do with it. It's useless to anybody in their hands. It's great to have a phone. Really, everybody here, we have technology, we have a phone. You know, the young generation, if I have to make a phone call, I am calling you and I'm hoping to talk to Brian. Well, that's the last thing a 17-year-old wants. All they want to do is text. So everything's changing, and people in our roles have to start realizing we have to adapt. We don't have to say we agree with what they do, but we do have to know it's there. We have to accept it, whether we like it or not, and we have to adapt to what the young people are starting to talk about, because that is our future. And I want them to look after me when I'm, you know, I want someone to look after me, yeah, when I forget what my name is. So.
Well, Dr. Fred, I know you're building programs at Tuck to help address this, so societal or business?
Sure. I think there is a societal issue, but there's also a business issue as well. I agree with the other panelists. And at Tuck, by the way, just a commercial, we do have what we call a digital excellence program that targets diverse businesses. We just started our first one in June in Cambridge, and we'll have another one in Seattle in December. But you know, the reason that we even have that program is that we acknowledge that there are gaps in the business community that can be attributed to, I think, smallness of the business, experience with certain technologies, and just some capabilities on the staff. And as you know, and there are a lot of smaller business people in the room today, minority business people, other businesses here. And if you are like me, when you have a technology issue, you go out and hire young people, right? Because they are more familiar with what's cutting edge. There's some training that needs to be done, but they grew up with the technology. They're very comfortable with the technology. When you get to my age and maybe even Scott's age, this adapting the technology gets to be a little more tough. But you know, we have to stay current. But I think on the societal side, I'm very optimistic about where technology is going in this country and around the world, and the potential that it has to even the playing field, because that's what technology does. It makes things that were once luxuries more or less commodities. And I think that's where we're going with technology to improve lives. And you know, economists have been looking at several aspects of technology recently that are puzzling. And one of those puzzling areas that economists are concerned about is productivity. And so if you've been following sort of the economic literature recently, it's that, you know, U.S. productivity is officially not growing as much as it had, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And they're questioning, well, why is this happening? And so some of the current thought is that, well, companies and individuals are not investing in technology in the ways that they used to, but the measure of output has changed. What productivity is looking at what are we producing and how much did it cost us to make that stuff. Well, we're not producing the same types of things anymore. We're consuming leisure. We're consuming things that are very difficult to measure, and technology makes that possible. So we are going through some major societal shifts, and so it is society. But I do think that we have to pay attention as business leaders and leaders of advocacy organizations and promoters of diversity. We do have to keep a constant look out for making sure that everybody has this technology to improve their businesses and their lives.
I'm sorry, I'm young and hip. I was actually texting my next question to Cliff.
I'm
Young,
sorry,
hip, and I'm
sorry,
also
Scott.
groovy. I would like y'all to know that too. But Clifford, as a business owner, I'd like to hear your thoughts, because you're in this IT space, societal or business?
And young.
Yes.
Let's go.
Well, that's
with
why I
that.
texted you,
Yeah,
because I didn't want to talk.
right.
If you want to text back the answer, they don't even have to be a part of this. I'm just saying, this could be us, because that's...
Here's what I've observed about technology, even before getting into the business, is that it boils down to, when it's first introduced, there's a high price. And as a result of being a high price, only a few people have it. And so those are those early adapters who either have money or they really focus on, I love technology, and they're willing to spend anything for it. So that's first and foremost. Yeah, just like the watch, that Apple Watch. So that's where we start. And over time, ultimately it ends up in every household. Like, for example, flat screen televisions. If we look back on how much they cost originally, we think people were crazy for buying them. Now every household, for all intents and purposes, has a flat screen television. So we always start out with the haves and the have-nots. And also there's someone in the industry somewhere that recognizes that, yes, the haves have it, so how do we get it to the have-nots? There's a big market share there for me to achieve. And so how do I make technology available to them? And therefore someone somewhere starts working on, how do we make this cheaper, better, and faster to get into those hands? And I'll make money on volume opposed to on this small group. So today, where we see the greatest effect in this is with education, because we can't give kids time back. You know, they either use it when it's available or not. And so that's where the limitation is in that regard. But there are those who are drivers in this business who says that I must get it in their hands out of increasing my shareholder value, if nothing else. And I think that's what's going to close it. The question only is how fast do they get there? And then there are service providers like ourselves here that then support that type of equipment. So when we start looking at the creation and then the delivery and then the support thereof, there is big, huge time frames that can either deliver value to individuals, or they're hampered by the fact that they don't get that in terms of achieving value. So I think what is going to make the greatest impact is how do we shorten that time frame in these new technologies and putting them in the hands of individuals that can really make a difference in America, because as we recognize, we're still a strong country. We're not as strong as we have been because the haves and the have-nots and how big that gap is. And we can take that back to wages and everything that is even bigger than the digital divide.
So, not to beat a problem to death, but at the bigger discussion, we like to bring these problems up, but we're also about solutions. So we're going to start with you, Dr. Fred, and then we'll just go around. But any thoughts on how we can begin to solve this problem, whether, because it sounds like it's societal and business-wise, so tackle either or both. But any kind of thoughts on how we might look at solving this problem?
Well, on the societal front, I would go back to my earlier comment that I think that we have to be prepared as a society to make the commitment and the universal access in this country to the internet. This is a technology that we take for granted because we use it all the time. But this is a technology that is dramatically changing the way we work, the way we live, and I think that this is the technology that will also keep us competitive in a global economy. It's an imperative that, I mean, this is in our interest to have every American citizen, regardless of race or economic status, have access to this technology. Said yesterday at the BDR that we don't know where the next Zuckerberg is going to come from. They could very well come from a very low-income community, from an individual who has access to this type of technology. So I think it's a great investment and should be a high priority of policymakers at the federal and the state level to increase access to technology. On the business front, I think that the entrepreneur that's driven by something different than what we're talking about at the societal level. Entrepreneurs want to make money, and entrepreneurs are only going to be successful in that pursuit of profit if they are facile with the cutting-edge technologies. They've got to figure it out. If they don't figure it out, they won't survive. And as an economist, that's probably how it should be. But I think to the extent that we can promote this technology, the cutting-edge technology, for minority businesses, for urban businesses, I think society gains.
Clifford?
I think it is a public-private focused solution where government is needed to participate and private institutions have to understand that they have to contribute as well. But at the end of the day, both needs have to be met. Therefore, it's going to require cooperation, collaboration with those two. And in some way, shape, or form, it's going to have to be regulated as well, so that from a societal perspective, this particular community doesn't get less than that community because it has more money or their per capita is higher in one versus the other. So I don't see how we get around that, because many things that we've done across this country have required government and private institution collaboration to deliver solutions to the citizens. And I think this is one that is overdue and needs to be put in the forefront of what needs to be done in our community, because if we continue to operate the way we are today, we're going to get behind. And then other countries are going to be the examples for us to follow, opposed to them following us in this way. So we created the internet. We created the Internet of Things. We have been the leader in this, so I suspect what we need to do is come together and lead like we have been to deliver solutions like we haven't seen them before. It's going to be something new.
Brian?
Yeah, all those comments resonate with me. I think we're all completely in line. I think it's multiple parties have a role to play. It's definitely a public-private partnership and grassroots on some levels. I would just add that there's a massive role in that mix for corporations to play, beyond what government does, but beyond what gets done at a grassroots level. And I talked about the scrutiny around diversity in tech that's going. You can tell I'm excited. I'm on the edge of my seat, right? Yeah. So there's so much scrutiny being paid now to the lack of diversity in tech, whether we're talking about Silicon Valley or tech careers generally. And while it's never great for corporations to have external scrutiny and the external parties knocking at your door, I think the wonderful thing about it is it's caused these companies to realize that there really is a problem. One, that we've got to mobilize around solutions. Two, and three, that the company that wins in diversity is a company that will win in the marketplace. And so given that, there's a tremendous amount of investment now in not having to reinvent the wheel, but investing in those organizations that are doing an incredible job of doing this now. And there's far too many to mention, but I'll mention one because I have an affinity for it, is the National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering, NACME. Right. Familiar with NACME? National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering. They do incredible work around trying to increase the representation of underrepresented minorities in STEM programs. It's by providing scholarships at the university level, but also reaching down K through 12 with innovative programs to try to capture the hearts and minds of future minority technologists. And that's just one example of many. And so as we talk about solutions, I think it's important to know there's a lot of good solutions out there. They just weren't getting the attention and love that they should have gotten, but we're seeing a tide of that now. I think it's all of our collective responsibility to continue that tide. Sure.
And I won't reiterate, and again, I agree with everything we're saying. I don't think there's anyone here that doesn't agree. But I go back to looking at a country like India. 30 years ago. And again, I understand there's only two levels there. There's either the rich and the poor. I understand that. But you're looking at a country that was the poorest in the world, and inside of 30 years become more millionaires in one country than any other place in the whole world combined. And that's based on one theory: give those children education. We have got to have education based at the bottom of what we do, and I'm getting from whether it be kindercare up to college. It has got to become to the forefront that education, technology, we have to push that. We have to get different programs within the school that relate into our businesses. We can't be putting children through literature classes. We still have to do that, but we have got to get them into our technology and what we're doing. We've got people coming out of college that, I don't know, I wish I had a number, but how many people went to college and then never used their degree? I mean, I just got a funny feeling, you know, and I wish that were stopping. It's not stopping. There are people coming out of college and they're going into a different field and they're taking a 2-year course real quick, and what happens? Bang, people lost their jobs. They went for a 2-year refresher and got a better job. There's something missing here. We need to make sure that education, and again, like everybody else said, whether it be economic, social, we need the education to be at the bottom of this all, and technology will go with that. And I believe once we do that, you're going to see young entrepreneurs, people that have great ideas that we don't even know about. But as long as we don't want to push education, everything that we're doing here, we're going to start training kids again as they come out of college, going down a different avenue. That's not the way the education is supposed to go. We do need young entrepreneurs. We need people that have great thoughts to help us go down the pathway to the future.
Scott, can I talk a little bit about the business piece again? Because, you know, I think we need to kind of distinguish between sort of the hardware, software stuff and the use of the technology from the point of view of businesses. And I think that's where there's a divide across businesses that are smaller and versus larger, that are minority versus perhaps non-minority, that have more resources than have less resources. And it's really about, in my view, about strategy. You know, very successful companies today have a digital strategy. So this is not just buying whatever's out there and throwing it up against the wall and see what sticks. Companies that are successful today in general, not just internet companies, not just technology companies, but all companies that are really successful today have a real digital strategy. And one thing that I would encourage the MBEs in the room to really think about is, what is your digital strategy? I mean, to the point, do you have it written down? What are you trying to accomplish? What tools are you using? What are the results of the use of those tools? That's what we try to do in our digital excellence program at Tuck, is to help MBEs develop those digital strategies that we see large companies implementing.
You know, Scott,
yeah, go ahead.
To your business point, one of the key things about small business, period, and MBEs are included in that without question, is that differs from the larger corporations, is that we buy our talent. The larger corporations have time to develop its talent. So when we're looking at the digital perspective, it is, does this person come with all the skills and capabilities that can have an impact on our business now? Where the large corporations bring someone in and has a developmental program that can take them along the way. So when for us, if we don't get the right person that can have an immediate impact, then we lose. The productivity, return on our investment, and things of that nature. So when I mentioned earlier around the resources, this is a key resource that we lack, which is, one, we don't have time to develop to deliver services to the larger organizations we serve. We have to deliver right now. Therefore, when we recruit, we have to recruit those who have the skills to help us deliver that solution right now, where the major corporations can groom an individual as long as they desire. Until that individual can't produce, then they'll release them. But the fact is that you have more, that major corps have more resources than the MBEs. That being said, clearly our strategy has to include how do you use those resources, or the other thing around smaller businesses and MBEs in particular, you can't find any organization in terms of small business, more specifically MBEs, that do more with less than anybody else. We're some of the most creative people that you'll find. And so from the corporate perspective is, many times you're being asked for MBEs to provide innovation, creativity, input, feedback, support. It comes as a result of not having. People don't sit around with a great deal of resources and say, you know what is it I don't have? What ultimately happens is you sitting around going, hey, if I had, I could do this, and as a result of not having this, let me go develop it and figure out how I can deliver that to some organization that's willing to pay me for it. So I think the digital divide cuts in both ways. One is, yes, it is indeed a detriment, but it's also an opportunity to say, how do I get over this to end up in a place that others wouldn't even imagine? And I think many of us in this room at some point in time in our lives wanted something, didn't have it, figured out how to get it, and then was better as a result of the way they found their way to it. And I believe this is very similar in that.
And Scott, real quick, if I could just answer one. We were in that same boat. We went straight to one of the major universities, and as of freshmen, and as of this year, we took high school kids. We are grooming them from kids in 9th grade, and they're coming for the summers. We took children out of college, freshmen, let them work with us for 4 years, and at the end of 4 years, now they don't have to join us, of course. Some actually, to be honest with you, you took 3 of them, which was great because they had,
sorry to do that.
They had real,
but happy to do it.
Yeah, they had real practicality in working. They weren't just sitting in a classroom. They were actually making money for us, and we were paying them. So in turn, we got a chance. We were in that same boat. So we went to a college and started grooming kids. Just let them come in 25 hours a week. Maybe they wanted more. And then you've got kids coming up here and saying, I'm going to school, and I'm also making 30 grand a year as a part-time student. But at the end of 4 years, if you want to join us, you got a spot. If not, go out into the market, which is great. But we keep this going. We were in that same boat. So you've got it. I'm not saying, hopefully you go to the computer science people and say, hey, we want some interns. And we just grew them along and just kept on doing it. Now we're up to like maybe 21 or 22 people we've had going through our program. And it's working out for us. It's a no-brainer. It's worked out real well.
It's impressive.
I didn't know. You looked like you were edging towards the front of your seat.
I'm trying to tether my enthusiasm a little bit.
I can appreciate that. So at the bigger discussion, as you know, by the way, thank you for everybody on Twitter. I am getting your questions, and we are going to start diving into those in 1 minute. But I did want to, because we wanted to keep the discussion going. So I'm going to give everybody on the panel 30 seconds to tell everybody in the audience how they can keep up with you, how they can follow you, how they can find you, whether that's your website, your Twitter, whatever you want to give out. And we'll start with Brian.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I didn't mention this at the outset because I know everyone wants to be tweeting all the really eloquent things we're all saying. So if you can find me on Twitter, please, at Brian Tippens, just BRINTIPPENS. Same on Facebook, LinkedIn, or briantippens.com. Please join me because I'd love to keep up the discussion after this. At Brian Tippens.
And Clifford A. Bailey.
It's just that simple. At Clifford A. Bailey on Twitter as well as on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Do you have a website? Or?
On the website is cabailey@techsoftsystems.com.
See, I was about to look up cliffordabailey.com.
You'll find me either way.
Dr. Fred.
You can find me on Twitter. I have a blog, Dr. Fred Blogs. .blogspot.com, but you can also find me at just Dr. Fred at Tuck, and you'll find my stuff. I do a bi-weekly newsletter, and I cover a lot of these types of topics, and please subscribe to it.
Gregory?
Same thing at Gregory Cheesewright, and we're at gregory.cheesewright at the computechcorp.com. Pretty simple, and hopefully you'll come up and ask for our cards when we're done, and we'll give you those out as well.
And just to tell them how to spell cheese right.
Just spell cheese and then W-R-I-G-H-T.
All right. Because I know some of y'all were struggling with the right part. I'm like, is that cheese W-R-I-T-E or is that R-I-G-H-T? Okay, so now we're going to get to, I apologize, we're going to get to some of these Twitter questions. And the first one that we're going to see is, for supplier diversity, what does the future look like? And so, Brian, you're edging towards the front of your seat.
Yeah, I am.
Can I take that one? Tell me what the future for supplier diversity
I'm glad that's
like.
the first question, because I was thinking about this as the last couple of gentlemen were talking through. We've all mentioned innovation, creativity, the need to innovate for MBEs, and I think that's probably the biggest distinguishing factor about where we need to go versus where we've been as MBEs. It's about innovating, and I think that we should keep in mind as we do this 3 primary types of innovation, some of which we're doing, but I want to put a challenge here to all of you. I think all of us in our businesses, we're all mature MBEs in the crowd, and so we all embrace the spirit of incremental innovation, periodically changing the current status to something new. Incremental innovation, I see people with their phones, so incremental innovation would be the iPhone 4 contained a better front-facing camera than the iPhone 3, or this Microsoft version of software was slightly better than the last version. Incremental innovations, and we do this in our business all the time. Beyond that, I want to challenge you to be disruptively innovating, embracing disruptive innovations, innovations that create a new market or create a significant change in an existing market. You know, I'm very old also, and when I was young, I used to go on a Friday evening to a store on the corner to rent videos to bring home to watch on the weekend, then rewind before I brought them back, or I'd buy these vinyl discs that played music, the needle went on them, then turned around. You know, that's all changed because of the disruptive innovation of iTunes, right? To the point where now Apple is probably still the largest distributor of digital media in the world. That's a disruptive innovation, it creates a new market. And we as MBEs should be embracing a spirit of disruptive innovation. But beyond that, to get us to the future, I think we all need to embrace a spirit of heretical innovation. Heretical innovation. And this is not my term, it's a term that came from an author by the name of Andrew Winston. He's a big thinker in the green environmental space. But what do you think I mean when I say heretical? What's the root of heretical? It's heresy. What is heresy? It's any departure from a traditionally established dogma. It's traditionally used in a religious context. So any Catholic school kids out there, you'll remember we studied the heretics in the Spanish Inquisition. They went against the teachings of the church. Did we embrace them? No, we burned them at the stake, right? Because they had ideas that were so counter to the traditionally established dogma. Think about what that means in your business. It's about not being afraid to ask the controversial questions, the questions that would have your boss thinking, are you smoking crack? What are you thinking? That's a crazy idea. And a couple quick examples. One would be, to kind of bring some context to this, would be waste management. You know the company Waste Management? Waste disposal company. There's probably something similar in all your locations where you live, and for years they made their fortunes off hauling ever-increasing amounts of waste away from consumers and charging you money for it. Well, imagine the first guy who went to the leaders of Waste Management and said, I think we should pay some of our customers for their garbage. It's a heretical idea. But indeed, they've evolved to the point now where they do that because they see the recycled content value in those disposable items, and they pay some of their enterprise customers to do that. Another example would be Xerox, a very mature, well-known U.S. company that called themselves the document company, and for years made their fortunes on selling increasing amounts of toners and faxes and big copiers to corporate customers. Well, one day somebody went to the board of directors of Xerox and says, I think we should sell less toners and copiers and faxes to our customers. That's a pretty darn heretical idea, but now they've evolved their business model to the point where they want to sell their customers on digital imaging solutions and less equipment. Those are heretical ideas that I want you to embrace as MBEs. I'll give you one more real quickly. If you don't know a young brother by the name of Frederick Hudson, please look him up. Frederick Hudson, H-U-T-S-O-N. Frederick was a young individual in the Bay Area who helped some of his friends that had a struggling marijuana distribution business. And so he helped them to create their better business model and export marijuana overseas by hollowing out some vessels. And long story short, he was arrested and went to jail, like happens to some of our youth.
Imagine that.
But when Frederick was in jail, he saw how difficult it was. He did a 5-year stint in federal prison and saw how difficult it was for prisoners to communicate with their loved ones, because when you go to federal prison, you're not in your community, you're far away. Some of us may know about this. You're far away from your loved ones, and it's very expensive to make those phone calls home because you're time limited, they're long distance calls. Well, forward-thinking Frederick had this heretical idea of creating this new innovation of using voice over IP to create local numbers for family members, and long story short, has created a startup strictly around services to prisoners in federal institutions, and just finished his first round of funding of over $5 million from these heretical ideas. So embracing ideas of innovation in our businesses, I think, brings us to that next level.
I'm going to go to you, Greg, next, but hopefully I will never experience Fred's technology.
Oh, boy. There's no question. We're all on the same wavelength here. But as Brian said, and I'm going to go back to this again, all these new thoughts and ideas, they're going to come from people that maybe one are right now 5 years old. Something new is going to come up, and you're going to hear about it from some 22-year-old. At that time, I'm going to be in my 70s. And this little talk we had here today is all about when we go back again to education. We have to accept it, and I agree with you fully, Brian. We have to be innovative, but we also have to take these ideas and accept them and say, wow, this is different. This isn't where I'm coming from. Let me hear more. And again, as Brian did say, when we get that content, what are we doing with it? Whatever this new technology is and the content, all we're doing is reading? I mean, because if that's the case, then you and I both know libraries and everything else are going where? Just, they're becoming monuments, museums. So we must embrace this, but we can't sit there and put it down because it's something we don't know. We have to look into it more. Yes, there's no doubt we need to be able to take a look at the people we're talking to, and it is different. I've got people in my company that, boy oh boy, I don't know how they do it every day writing code, but they're very good. And again, you have to realize there are people out there, so you can push the buttons on your phone to make it do something. They allow and write that to allow that to happen. And you're like, well, how do you do that? Well, that's why we're here and they're there, okay? So again, I just believe it's going to be education. And I'm going back to this because I'm so heavily involved with it, and I see it working. And I see it working in areas, whether it be in Detroit or Cleveland, New Orleans, St. Louis, Tampa Bay. There are areas where it needs to work, and we are going to grab, whether it be a young woman in a school who doesn't have a chance, or a young boy that has an idea, and we go, oh wow, you know, that was a great idea. And then 10 years later, we develop it or they develop it. We've got to make sure the education is there for these children, and I think we'll all grasp it.
And Mr. Clifford A. Bailey, as MBEIC Chair, I know you have your finger on the pulse of the future of supplier diversity. Give us a look into the future.
My view is a little different, and you can just well imagine that. What I see the future of supplier diversity being is that it will become a competitive imperative. Those corporations clearly recognize the benefit of minority suppliers, will then start looking at how do I strategically utilize them to carve out a larger piece in the market, and how do I utilize them and how do I provide them with resources to complement where they are and where they're going, so that our shareholders end up benefiting from their knowledge, capability, capacity, capital, and all of their resources and creativity. Then I see them taking it and having the conversations in the boardroom about how they integrate supply diversity throughout the entire organization. Supply diversity doesn't just belong to one person or a small department. It is everybody's responsibility in the organization, because they recognize that this is our competitive advantage. We will win, we will dominate the marketplace, and we'll develop loyal customers because of the things that these specific suppliers bring to the table. Correct. They will have superstars that they'll recognize as the MBEs. They'll also be utilizing MBEs to hold other suppliers honest. Because once an MBE gets into an organization, that MBE becomes a game changer. Here's the reason why. One, they have to win business to stay. The people that are there that is already providing the service, if they're looking to stay, they have to also continue to provide innovation, creativity, as well as demonstrate that they're going to bring on new ideals that's going to benefit that organization. So it is to the corporation's benefit to at least bring in an MBE so that they can hold their other suppliers accountable. Imagine that. And as I shared this morning, the MBE is there focused all day, every day to sustain his or her business, because one, they recognize the pressure of what it took to get there is not going to keep them there. Right. But at the end of the day, the corporation, more so than anything else, says these are the individual organizations that's going to make a profound difference for us. And it's like any championship team. When they find you, they're going to hold on to you until, again, it's a business, until you can't deliver what they need. And based upon the creativity of MBEs, I think it is a bright future in terms of what supply diversity will be in the next 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Fred, you're a former regional president for the NMSDC. Now you're leading the program for diverse businesses at Tuck. I don't want to put any pressure on you. But if anybody can look into the crystal ball and tell me what the future of supplier diversity is, it would be you, Dr. Fred.
Well, I wish my crystal ball was clear, but you know, if you look, I think you take a look back first before you look forward, and I think that helps us to understand, you know, some of the difficulties of projecting or predicting the future. But you know, this whole enterprise of supplier diversity, you know, you can go back 50 years perhaps to look at the federal government's role in promoting supplier diversity, and then the defense contractors, the automobile industry, and others beginning to do it. And if you look at what that looked like in the late 60s, early 70s, it doesn't look like anything that we're observing today. And I think the future, you know, not that far out future, I think 10 years from now, what we call supplier diversity will be very different. It will look very different than what we see today. On that, I'm clear. What that specifically will look like, I'm not so clear on. But we do know some things. We know that demographically, the nation is still going through some dramatic changes, even to the point where the term minority is losing its meaning. The term, and I recommend several books on the issue of race, is losing its meaning. And there's some really interesting work that's being done now that shows that the whole concept of race itself is not a physical characteristic, it's a social characteristic. Now, that doesn't make it any less of an issue, but it's not physical. So we're seeing some dramatic changes in society, and I think we're also seeing some dramatic changes in corporations. How corporations make their money, how they're organized, how suppliers provide services and interact with those corporations is changing dramatically. You know, today when corporations look for suppliers, they're not looking for an arm's length relationship that you typically think of a business deal. They really are looking for a partner, a strategic relationship with somebody that is going to help both of them accomplish something. And so that's a different mindset. So that's where we're going. I would also say, from a practical point of view, if you are in business today, 10 years from now, whatever you sell today is not going to be what you sell 10 years from now if you are around 10 years from now. So, and that goes not only for the smaller businesses, that goes for the large businesses. HP won't be the same, Apple won't be the same. I mean, look at some of these large companies. I mean, AT&T, we grew up with AT&T, Ma Bell, providing a hardline phone service. You know, they're in the entertainment business now. They could not have survived just providing hardline phone service. So good companies adapt and change. We have to change. And I think I'm optimistic about where minority entrepreneurs will be, but it will be different. And the ones that survive are the ones that adapt. And the ones that are creative, they are innovative, they're using this technology, and they're trying and doing new things.
And we are getting ready to wrap this up because I see my version of the Sandman at the Apollo getting ready to come across the stage. But before we do, I want to thank the panelists. I'm going to give each one of them a minute or two to give us their final thoughts on whatever you want to tell us. And also, please reiterate one more time how the audience can follow you going forward. But now we'll start the way we'll finish the way we started. I'll begin with you, Clifford A. Bailey. Give us your final thoughts and tell us how we can keep an eye on you.
Again, you can reach me at Clifford A. Bailey for Twitter. You can reach me Clifford A. Bailey on LinkedIn. And you can also reach me at see, I'm getting confused myself. C.A. Bailey at TechSoftSystems.com. My final thoughts are, I think the future is promising if we take a positive attitude towards it. I think that MBEs can be key to the information age that we're in, where this divide is occurring, that we can help close that gap. I think there's tremendous economic opportunities if we concentrate on and work with major organizations and say, what are the needs that you have that aren't fulfilled today, and how can we assist you in making that happen? I think if we have that honest dialogue, creativity is going to come through, there's going to be opportunity, there's going to be resources available, and at the end of the day, there will be more millionaires, but there will also be a greater economy and we'll be a better country.
Gregory, I'm going to turn it over to you. Final thoughts, and how can we keep in touch with you?
Gregory.cheesewright at ComputechCorp.com. Please look me up on LinkedIn. I think the future is going to be good as long as, again, education is at the forefront, and every one of the MBEs in here need to make sure that they innovate. And as Dr. Fred said, we have to be innovative. What you're doing today doesn't necessarily mean you'll even do it 3 months from now. You'll sit down with one of your suppliers and you're going to find out there's a niche or something that you can get involved in, and it might take off. And I say that from, we've done the same thing in our company. You don't know it's there, but you must have these, as you said, you must have these discussions. Sit down. How can we help you? Where do you need to go? And where do you want to go with your own companies? Where do you want to go with your division inside of your company? What are you trying to do? Just don't take every day, I'm going to wake up and go to work. Have a plan. Have something foresee where you want to go for the future, whether it be in small increments so you can have success. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Do I have mentors? Do I have someone I can go to talk to? You know, maybe once a month you take something out of somebody and say, hey, I got this idea. What do you have? A mentor. If you don't have one, you need to at least be able to bounce things off other people. But and as we've said before, innovation, I believe, is going to be everything for the MBE. We have got to be innovative. Technology is there. Learn how to use it, grasp it, educate yourself, and be ready to go.
Dr. Fred, how can we follow you, and what are your final thoughts?
Dr. Fred at Gmail. If you just Google Dr. Fred McKinney, you'll find me, I hope. There's a guy out there who has my name, but he's a photographer, and there's another guy who's a physician. Don't follow them, all right? But I do practice medicine without a license on the side. So, Scott, I'll be happy to work with you on your hair challenge. We have an app for that. No, I would simply conclude that, keep your eyes open. Be open to new ideas. What happens to us, unfortunately, typically when we age, we calcify. And that's a dangerous thing for any business owner, particularly an entrepreneur, because you're in the business of change. And so change is going to happen. You should embrace that change. You should look forward to that change. And you should really be visionary. There are things that we do today that are simply not going to be done in the future. I really believe that the business of where we're going societally is a business that's going to be geared towards leisure, quite frankly. We're working less and less. We're spending more and more time not at a traditional job. Me personally, I have a cubicle in Hanover, New Hampshire, but I'm probably there less than once a week. I don't need to be there. And I think this is happening around the country, around different businesses. But we've built up an economy based on a way of work, a way of living that is dramatically changing. And for entrepreneurs to think about how they can create opportunities to do things differently, those are going to be the winners of the future.
Brian Tippens, no pressure, but for our panel, these are the final thoughts that this audience is going to hear.
Let's make them good.
And the impression that you leave them with is going to reflect on all of us.
This is going to be deep.
So Brian, give us your final thoughts and tell us how we can follow you. And
honored to be able to kind of bring this to a close with some final thoughts. Hope we can continue the dialogue. Please do connect with me at Brian Tippens on Twitter or briantippens.com. I think one of the key takeaways from this is that we mostly all concede there is a divide on some level, but that collectively we've done a lot of work societally and in our businesses to move the needle, to get to where we are today, and we should be proud of that. But I think we'd all agree that kind of what got us to here won't get us to there. Mm-hmm. You can tweet that. What got us to here won't get us to there. There's still work that we all have to collectively do to get us to the next level. And we talked a little bit about that, this idea of innovation, not just innovating incrementally, not just disruptive innovation, but embracing the spirit of heretical innovation to get us to the next level. We all concede innovation is important. But the last thing I note, sort of building on one of the messages of Dr. Fred, when he noted that our products and services that we sell to our customers today may not exist in the future. We're not widget salespeople anymore, and for that reason, I think we should embrace the spirit of creating a unique customer experience, not being a widget provider or service provider, but an experience provider to our customers. It used to be okay, and we were all taught in B school or wherever you studied business, that our goal was customer satisfaction. But I'd argue that that's no longer enough. We must migrate past customer satisfaction to customer loyalty, where our customers will come back to us again and again, all things being equal, to a spirit of customer advocacy, where our customers are so satisfied with what we do and the relationship we provide that they become they're our best advocates. It used to be enough, or it used to be said, that a satisfied customer will tell 2 or 3 people, but an unsatisfied customer will tell 10 or 11. Well, I have 35,000 Twitter followers. If I'm not happy, I'm going to tell a lot of people fast, and they're going to tell a lot of people as well. So as we think about bridging that divide and getting to the next level, think about those relationships and being that customer experience provider to those we serve.
So, in closing, I would like to say, I didn't do this earlier, and I apologize. I need to say a big thank you to the Southern Region Minority Supplier Development Council Board of Directors. Are there any board members in here? Thank you. Thank you. Let's give them a applause. Members of the staff of the Southern Region Minority Supplier Development Council, are you in here? Anybody that's on the staff? Give them a hand. And Don't forget hashtag Gateway 2015, and what was the bigger discussion hashtag, Phelan? Hashtag bigger discussion, and I will leave you with this.
Well, Scott, before you close, you must share with the audience how they can reach you.
Oh.
Follically impaired brother.
Why, thank you, Clifford. I had never thought of such a thing. So you can follow me on Twitter at Scott A. Vowels, at Scott A. Vowels. That's V as in Victor, O-W-E-L-S. My website, scottvowelsphd.com. The one thing I was concerned about with this audience, and I'm just going to be honest with you because this is what the bigger discussion is all about, there were not near enough hands to go up when Brian said how many people have my book. I saw like 2 or 3, and I know it wasn't because all y'all were shy. So you go on, you can go on Scott Vowels PhD or on Amazon. But coming full circle, the bigger discussion, this is our 4th bigger discussion. We're probably going to have at least one more. And we really want to make sure that the 5th one is the best bigger discussion ever. I think this was probably the best bigger discussion we've had. We had great panelists. But we need your input. We said from the beginning when we started this in 2012 that the bigger discussion is you. So I need to know, we need to know, who you want on the panel, what topics you want discussed. I loved all the questions. I apologize for not being able to get to more of them on Twitter. I love all the comments on Twitter. But this discussion needs to continue. And this is the embryonic stage of the discussion. If this discussion dies here, then everything we've talked about dies here. So you are the bigger discussion. You own the bigger discussion. And we need to continue the bigger discussion. Get in touch with us. Get in touch with any of us. Tell us what you want to talk about. Get in touch with the council, the Southern Region Minority Supplier Development Council. Tell them what you want to talk about, because right now that's where we're having it. We're housing it in New Orleans. The bigger discussion is you. You've done a great job. I thank you. I applaud you. And we will see you next year.